Welcome to the Work Hard, Play Hard podcast. My name is Rob Murgatroyd, and I'm a former doctor turned lifestyle entrepreneur. Each week, I interview some of the best minds on the planet on the science of achievement and the art of fulfillment. Come take this journey with me. Excuses are over. It's time to live.
The common wisdom in my parents' generation was you go to college, you go to more college, the more college and education that you have, the better qualified you're going to be for whatever comes later, and then you get hired by a company, and then you get a stable paycheck. That is no longer the case. When people vote with their wallet, it's one thing, but when people put their entire well-being financially in your hands for a long period of time with no guaranteed return, that's something else entirely. Getting quote-unquote fired from my old company was actually the best thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to re-examine all of my priorities. It forced me to re-examine all of the things in my life that were creating good things in my life and the things that were not.
What's up, everybody? This is Rob Murgatroyd. Welcome to another episode of the Work Hard, Play Hard show. This episode features Jordan Harbinger of the Jordan Harbinger Show. You can find him on Instagram and elsewhere at Jordan Harbinger. I wanted to have Jordan on the show for a bunch of reasons. He is one of the best at the craft of interviewing, and he interviews some really brilliant people. Jordan and I go back a long time, and watching his growth has been a blast. We dug deep in what it's like for him these days and the new hill that he's climbing. Before we get into this episode, you may be climbing your own new hill, and that's why I want to remind you that my 2019 Mastermind is filling up quickly in terms of the applications rolling in. I have not started my pre-qualification phone calls yet, but remember, this is on a first-come, first-served basis for getting your application in line. I do go through them all, and I look for the best fits. And then I set up a phone call to see if it's a great fit between you and me and our existing group. So if you're interested at all, go to the workhardplayhardpodcast.com/mastermind. This mastermind is the fastest way I know of to 10x your business, up-level your tribe, and get a clear path to grow your business and your relationships to the next level. It is like a significant shortcut. So go to workhardplayhardpodcast.com/mastermind and fill out the application. So in this mastermind, I put you into a group of high-level achievers where everyone is at your level or higher. You'll be in 3 different masterminds throughout the year, 1 domestic, 2 international, and be a part of what I call experiential learning. I learn best by doing cool things with cool people and not in the back of a Holiday Inn conference room. So I redesigned it. Who's it for? It's for any upper 6-figure earner that is at $300,000 or above, or those that are just barely squeaking over their first million. So even if you're just curious, go to workhardplayhardpodcast.com/mastermind and apply. Okay, in this conversation, we talk about everything from what led Jordan to the end of his previous business and how he had to start from scratch all over again and how he did it and how he didn't get pissed about that. That was what was really interesting to me. We also talked about how being on shows like Larry King and Adam Carolla, to name a few, affect his numbers. I always wondered, like, if you go on a giant show like Larry King or Adam Carolla, like, do you blow up or do you not? Great answers to that. And we also talked about what it was like working in the dating space. So he was in, you'll learn about this, he was in the dating worlds, the online dating world. And he's got some opinions about that now that he's a married man. You can find him on the socials at Jordan Harbinger. Be sure to take a screenshot of this episode, share it on the socials, and remember to tag me and Jordan Harbinger and let us know what you thought. If it's your first time here and you haven't subscribed, just say, "Hey Siri, subscribe to the Work Hard, Play Hard podcast." So without further ado, please enjoy this conversation I had with Jordan Harbinger. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
You know what, man? I am super excited to dig into this interview because so much has freaking changed in your life since we last talked, and I'm so pumped to get into it.
Yeah, there's been quite a few changes in the past, handful of years, like huge changes.
I know, it's crazy. We did our first interview, I think it was 10 years ago, man. Do you know that? You interviewed me for Jet Set Life. Can you believe that?
That's crazy. That makes sense. It was probably, you're right, it was probably like 9-10 years ago.
It's crazy. All right, so I'm excited to dig into a couple of things. I want to talk first about your backgrounds, go into a little bit about the kind of work that you're currently doing, and then I want to talk about how you're incorporating some play into your newly married life, and then we'll wrap up with some rapid fire questions. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, so I think a good jumping off point for us would be to wind the clock back a bit to when you were around 13, 14 years old, and you were a sort of a super shy kid, but you were crafty in that you learned how to wiretap phones, including your neighbors.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through what that time in your life was like, and sort of how did that inform where you currently are?
So when I was a kid, I was an only child, and I was absolutely bored out of my gourd, so to say. And I've figured out how to open up those little green boxes on the side of the road that are full of line pairs, and that's every landline phone in the neighborhood. And this is 1994 or so. So everybody had a landline, nobody had a cell phone. Some houses had two, most people at least had one. And so I was able to listen in on phone calls, because really all you need is a phone with alligator clips on the back end that will amplify the signal coming through those line pairs. They are completely not secure at all. And that was what I started doing. And there was one right near my house, and I would go back there and listen for hours and like put my bike next to the box and just listen and listen and listen. And then as cell phones started to become more, I wouldn't say ubiquitous, but certainly some people had them, especially in my area near busy streets, I got a cell phone, a used one, and I programmed it to listen to cellular channels. And I was able to essentially listen to those phone calls too. And I was mostly interested at that time in the system, like how's the phone work? How's the technology work? How do radio frequencies, signals, and all that stuff work? But I then got interested in the people talking on the phones, because I heard a neighbor of mine, and he was getting a divorce. And I remember seeing him, and he was like not super nice, and he was kind of like what we might call in modern parlance, kind of a douche. You know, he had like a Corvette that he would drive around way too fast in the neighborhood, blasting his music with the top down. And it's like, who are you impressing? But he also lived with his mom, which I thought was kind of, you know, classic insecure guy move, to have that kind of car while living with your mom and be really showy about it. And so he was getting a divorce, and he would talk to his mom on the phone sometimes when or maybe it was his aunt, because I guess he did live with his mom. So I hadn't really thought about that. He talked to somebody older on the phone, and he would be all like, woe is me. And then he would talk to his sister, and he would be kind of like, woe is me. What's my ex-wife's problem, or soon to be ex-wife's problem? Then he'd talk to his buddies, and he'd be like, whatever, I don't even care. If she wants this, she could come and get it, you know, like tough guy. And I just remember thinking, if this guy was the same way with his sister and mom as he was with his soon-to-be ex-wife, he would not be in this situation. And as a 14-year-old kid, that was kind of a funny realization, because I'm just thinking, how does this guy not know that? And I started, that was probably for me one of the first times that adults became three-dimensional people with feelings and problems. Because I was, you know, as a kid, and you probably don't remember this because I barely do, as a kid, your parents are the only people that you kind of know well that are adults. And otherwise, adults like drive you places sometimes, yell at you, feed you stuff, give you homework. That's pretty much it. Soccer coach yells at you, gives you, an apple or something, right? Like, that's what adults are. They're like this sort of alien entity. And you don't know, you're not familiar with the ins and outs of their lives. You might hear your parents talking about other adults, but you don't even know what's going on. Like, oh, the Hendersons are behind on their house payments. Shelly was telling me. You don't know what that means, and you don't care. You're like playing Nintendo and watching Perfect Strangers reruns. So that was the first time where I had somebody talking about things that were very adult topics and not censoring it or talking down to me as a kid. So I had this early initiation into that. And we all know other kids that had early initiations into things that were way too adult, and they turn out poorly, right? Like people whose parents are drug addicts and there's violence in the house and drugs and drinking and stuff. That's bad, right? But this was kind of like, here's just enough of a window to get you curious and teach you things while still being sheltered from all of this drama.
Around that age, you were sort of like we talked about. You were sort of shy. You're listening in on the phone calls, and you're sort of coming into your own there. What did you? I'm trying to get a sense for Jordan back in that time. What did you think you were going to be, say, in high school?
I had no idea because I was a good student in elementary school, terrible student in middle school, pretty bad up until junior year of high school, where literally I was in home economics and I was one of 3 guys that got stuffed into that class because like IT or whatever and tech classes were full. And so I remember the home economics teacher hated the guys because we didn't want to be there. She knew we didn't want to be there. And then I just decided at one point that I was going to just do all the work and do well because she was kind of like, I'm not passing anybody just because they're in this class. And I'm like, I'm not going to get a C in home economics. That's just embarrassing. So I did all the work. And I remember the teacher started to actually like me because I was the only guy that did the work. And I remember being like, I've got to work harder than the girls because I'm a dude and it's kind of a girls' class, especially in the 90s. And so I worked and worked and worked. And I remember one day she sat me down and she goes, I know that you don't have great grades for the past couple of years, but you're really doing well in my class. And I've talked with other teachers and you're doing well in their class. And she's like, I know I'm not supposed to know all this stuff, but I'm a teacher and I don't care. And she goes, you're capable of doing the work. You need to work your butt off for the next 2 years if you're going to get into a good college. You have no, you need to do that. Does that make sense? And I was like, yeah, I know. And she's like, no, yeah, I know. Do you understand? And I was like, yeah, I got to start off with a bang. She's like, you have to start off with a bang. You're already 2 years behind. You can do it. It's going to be fine. You just have to work in those other classes like you're working in my class. And so I did. I worked really hard and I got really good grades. I went from I don't care about anything to straight A's pretty much. And then when I applied to college, I continually worked and worked and worked, but I had no clue what I wanted to be. All I knew was that school was not a great fit for me. But there weren't entrepreneurs. There weren't people who did their own thing in Michigan in the 90s. There wasn't. There were people who failed and did their own thing because they didn't have other options, but that wasn't what my parents had told me. And it wasn't because they were malicious or wanted me to do anything specifically to follow in their footsteps or anything. But people weren't saying, well, college isn't for everybody. Some people go to trade schools and do other things. And some people become artists. People weren't doing that. People didn't say that that was a path to success. The common wisdom in my parents' generation and a little bit later, and that persisted throughout raising kids in the 80s, 90s, and probably early aughts was you go to college, you go to more college, the more college and education that you have, the better qualified you're going to be for whatever comes later. And then you get hired by a company and then you get a stable paycheck. That is no longer the case, but I don't blame anybody for telling me that in the 90s because that was absolutely true back then. This is Motor City before the economic collapse where all the manufacturing moves out. This is a generation of parents that grew up, worked for General Motors or Ford, retired in 30 years and were happy and that was it. So that was a very good, obvious path. And for me, I was like, that sounds miserable, but maybe I'm just immature and don't get it.
But you still sort of did it anyway. I mean, you wound up, you decided to go to law school. You took a job on Wall Street, and then you sort of got out of that, and you found yourself in the world of the art of charm. So maybe we can just take a quick second here and explain for people who aren't familiar, what is the art of charm, and why did you decide to do it after you followed this path of school that we're talking about?
Right. So the Art of Charm is my old company that I founded, currently involved in a lawsuit with the guys who are still there because they basically fired everyone on the team and took all of the intellectual property and didn't abide by the deal that we had negotiated. So I'll preface it with that. If people are like, oh, this looks interesting, I'll preface it with not good, in my opinion, to be doing business with people who operate like that. But the company I started it in law school with currently the guy who is one of the guys who's running it. And it was I had come up with the idea that networking was a really good idea, but nobody cared about that back then. And so I started going and working on those skill sets myself. However, that was not what 20-something-year-old kids were interested in. So we started teaching essentially dating science and like how to meet girls and things like that. And that was great when we were in our 20s. Now, of course, I'm 38 and that stuff is really played out. But it started getting me interested in concepts like body language, persuasion, nonverbal communication, all of the stuff that I had kind of been interested in back in like the wiretapping days, if you will, in the social engineering days, only it was applied to the field of the opposite sex, which was far more exciting. So the Art of Charm was essentially in many ways sort of my precursor company that I ran for 11 plus years that got me initiated into the world of training and knowing a lot about persuasion, influence, nonverbal communication, things like that, except it was dating related. And so now what I do at Advanced Human Dynamics and on the Jordan Harbinger Show is I do what I think is the adult version. And I don't mean that in the porny way. I mean the grown-up version, I should say, of the things that I started with back at my old company. So it's an evolved version that I think is in many ways much more advanced, hence the name.
Okay, so I don't want to get like knee deep because I know that there's litigation and you're an attorney, and I know that I'm going to ask all the wrong questions. So I don't want to go too deep down that road. But I do want to talk a little bit about just the emotion behind it, because I think that there's some lessons here that people can glean from this. So when this ended for you, you could have been all bitter and nasty and resentful, but it doesn't seem to me that you were. Maybe your wife and friends would have a different answer, but it doesn't seem to me, looking in from the outside, that you were super bitter.
No.
If you're not, what were some of the strategies that you've used to get your thinking right around this?
Great question. So at first, I felt really like sad about it because I did build up a show to millions of downloads a month. And that's where the Jordan Harbinger Show is now at 4 million downloads a month, thankfully, after 7 months of starting something new, which was great. And I'll get to that in a second because that was one of the major factors in my quote unquote recovery. But I did go through several phases where it was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to start again? This is so sad, to this is overwhelming, to this is so stressful, things like that. But I never really went through like the anger phase. Like, am I upset about how things turned out because the people dealing with it are dishonorable, generally speaking? Yeah. But I'm not like, I'm going to do all this bad stuff to them. I really don't care in that respect because, and people don't necessarily believe me when I say that, but let me explain what I mean. The reason that that's the case is because I've been in business for 12 plus years or 11 plus years, I guess now. And so I've had people steal things from me. I've had people vandalize IP. I've had people take opportunities away from me in a way that is legitimately unfair. I've been in situations where everybody says, you should sue this person, you're going to win. And I'm just like, hang on, like, let's relax. And when I look at people that have dealt with us dishonorably in the past, much as the guys that I worked with at the old company are doing now, one of them, and I'm not even kidding here, Rob, one of them lives in his car. One of them ends up moving back with his mom for years. Another guy is online, always trying to sell the latest and greatest sort of scammy baloney thing. And these are guys that I worked with like 8+ years ago. And I remember in the moment when those guys did something horrible or stole from us or dealt with us dishonorably, I remember me and my current business partners or, girlfriend or whatever being like, this is the worst thing. This is the worst person. I'm going to spend time and energy thinking about how I can get back at them and all this. And nothing mattered because it sure seemed really awful and miserable. And they won this one, but they won't win the war. Wah, that stuff. But then I just went on with my life and kept building Advanced Human Dynamics, the Jordan Harbinger Show, my personal brand, whatever project I was working on. And then you kind of wake up one day and you're having a glass of whiskey with an old friend and you go, what did happen to that guy? And then you get on Google and you go, oh my gosh, why did I worry about this person, taking this opportunity from me? And then I was all like catastrophizing in my head. They're going to then get other opportunities and then I'm going to lose my business and I'm going to have to do it. No, they're going to live in their car. You know what I mean? Like, and even if somebody does something to you and they're successful later, it really just doesn't matter because it's not these one-off deals that make or break people. It's not this like, that was my opportunity and it should have been me. If you're working hard, You're constantly creating opportunity for yourself. You're constantly creating good content. You're constantly engaging your show's fans if that's what you're doing. You're constantly working on your email, your marketing, your social media, the product quality that you have. People, you can outwork other people just like I outworked people in freaking home economics, right? It's not the one project where someone stole your homework and then they got an A, but it was you who did the work, right? It's you getting an A on the weekly project for the entire semester that gets you a good grade. So to take that analogy further, it really isn't something that I knew in the moment that it was awful and I had to start from zero with the Jordan Harbinger Show. But now I look back and I have every single day a new note from new fans. Hey, I love this. It's better than the old show. Hey, I love what you're doing. Hey, thanks for continuing what you're doing. You know, my social media, my downloads, my sponsorships, everything is up from even the peak of where I was with the old company. And I started from zero in February of this year. So it really didn't make, I knew it was going to take me a few years to recover. I didn't think it would happen within a year.
Well, what's so interesting about this process is, you know, as I aged and was listening to your show, I started to not be at the old show. I started to not be able to identify some of the things, you know, when you were talking about things that were in the toolbox, let's say. And I found myself not listening to the show more and more. But then you had some really great people on, and you're such a good interviewer that I was like fighting through that part of the show to listen to. It's kind of like I'm not a big sports guy, but I like to listen to Jay. Is this Jay Marr? Is that his name?
Jay Marr? Yeah, a good friend of mine. I love that guy. Such a funny dude.
He's funny. He's interesting. But when he gets into sports, it's like, you know, like I'm not a sports guy.
Right.
So I had that same thing. So for me now, listening to your show is so freaking good. I mean, you are right up there with the best of them, you know, whether it's Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan or any of the ones that a podcast listener would know. I mean, you are at the top of that chain for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What lesson did you learn the most through that process?
Through which process?
The process of ending The Art of Charm, starting your new podcast, and being where you currently are now. Look, when you look back on this, there's always a lesson for me anyway. I mean, I don't want to get like, you know, too esoteric or go too deep into outer space, but, you know, was there some cosmic lesson for you that looking back on this, you're like, okay, this is the writing on the wall. I didn't see it and I should have.
Yeah, there were a few. And some of these are going to sound self-serving / arrogant, but you asked and I'll tell you because it is sort of something that I've had to come to. I had to face it. And I know that doesn't sound like usually when people face good things, they're happy. But for me, it was like a process. When the old company, when I, you know, just essentially split off from the old company, they fired everybody that worked with me closely. So it was like 30 plus people and they didn't pay them. And those people, I thought, oh my gosh, they're going to blame me. This is such a disaster. I can't believe it. You know, there's all these horrible things that are going to happen as a result. And all of these show fans immediately found the Jordan Harbinger Show. And all of my friends and all of my family and all the people I worked with were like, look, you are the show. You're the face of the business. This is something that you can recover from. I think it's their loss. But when you hear that, you're thinking, it's like when you're young and you're like, why are other people picking on me? And your mom's like, because they're jealous of you, honey. And you're like, oh, okay, but that's not really the case. It's because you're weird, right? So like, or because you can't play baseball or something. So like, I didn't necessarily believe that. But after a while, I started to realize, well, wait a minute. I did put 11 years of work into being a good interviewer, being a good broadcaster. I did manage my team really well. I did build relationships with my fans. I did build relationships with my team. And so what I found when I split and started the Jordan Harbinger Show and Advanced Human Dynamics was that the majority, in fact, everyone actually, came with me to the new company. And that was a huge loss for the old company and a huge win for us, even though I couldn't even pay them. So a lot of people worked for free for a while. And the reason they did that was because they were mistreated in the old company, but also because they believed in what we were going to create. And for people to work for you for free or for half pay, that's a vote of confidence that is it's different than somebody paying lip service to like, you can do it. I believe in you, buddy. I'm going to let you not pay me for 6 months because I believe that in 6 months or a year, you're going to be better than you were before. And I know that you're an honorable enough person that you'll make me whole again. When people vote with their wallet, it's one thing. When people vote with lip service, it's another. But when people put their entire well-being financially in your hands for a long period of time with no guaranteed return, that's something else entirely. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And, if you think about it, what is the commonality here? The commonality is you. I mean, the downloads went right up to where they were previously because of you. The employees came with you and they weren't tied to money because of you. So that's the lesson that I hear in this, that, you are, whatever the legality is, I don't give a shit. The reality is that you are the man. You are the person, and everybody was connected to who you are, which is why everybody unsubscribed to that and resubscribed to where you are now. So that's how I see it from my perspective.
Well, I appreciate that. And the data does, so far, the data that I can see show that that's the case. But in the moment, you don't necessarily believe that, right? Like I thought in that moment when everything fell apart, oh my gosh, it took me 11 years to build the Art of Charm. And I basically had to do it myself because I wasn't with my team, not alone. But, with my team, I didn't have investors. I didn't have competent partners, and in the building of a podcast, because none of us were. We didn't know what we were doing, right? I had to learn that all. I'm including myself in that bunch as well. And so that was something that I thought was extremely difficult, scary. But what people told me who were smarter than me and had more experienced entrepreneurs, they said, look, it took you 11 years because you didn't know what you were doing. It's going to take you 2 or 3 years maximum because now you do. And I was like, but I don't know. People find you slowly and they're like, just do the 20% of everything that actually worked from the old company and bring it to the new one. And most importantly, it was utilizing my network. And that's why, going back to what I teach most of the time now with advanced human dynamics and stuff like that, is my network was and is by far the most important lever. And that was the thing that everybody underestimated when the company split. Was I think that my old business partners thought, we're just going to take the show, we're going to take the email list, and we're going to take the website and screw Jordan, and he's never going to be able to do anything because we have all the assets. But that wasn't really the case.
No.
They have those assets. But the important thing was actually the relationships that I had with every single person that I interviewed, every single person that I've been talking to, all of the fans. Those are the real assets. You can rebuild an email list. You can rebuild a podcast back catalog. You can rebuild web traffic in the way that you need to. What you can't do is start a brand over from zero and then go, hey, you know how you liked that guy I worked with? Well, you're supposed to like me now. That doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. All right, so let's take a right turn. What you are known for sure, is podcasting. And when I put a tweet out asking what questions to ask you, 90% of the questions were with regard to podcasting because, as you and I know, everybody and their brother now wants to have a podcast. I have no idea really what it takes to have a good podcast. So I thought I would serve a few of those questions if you're down for it.
Sure.
All right. So you are one of the guys who get the A-list guests. And like I said earlier, I put you up there with, the big boys, the Joe Rogans, the Tim Ferrisses, et cetera. What makes a good podcaster?
Well, different people have different questions for that. So when I look at people's strengths, Tim's is he's really good at breaking things down, but he's not necessarily like going to be more entertaining or more energetic or more prepared, for example, with a guest. But his strength on his show is he'll get a really interesting investor and he'll be like, this is what this guy is thinking about, right? What Joe Rogan does, he's funny, he's got such a goofball mindset. He'll get a really big name celebrity in there and he'll rap with them and get them for 3 hours and get them to say all kinds of funny stuff or talk about things or get them to smoke weed or whatever. And that makes his show entertaining and funny. But I don't necessarily have those. What I do is I will grab a guest and I will read their book and I will watch all of their talks and I will prepare more than anyone else. I will know the subject matter so well that I'm able to ask them questions about that subject matter. That's not just, hey, I looked at the cover of your book and now I have random questions that I could have gotten the answer to by simply reading the synopsis online. I'm asking advanced questions, and I also have the guest teach the audience what they actually know and how to apply it. So our show, the Jordan Harbinger Show, every episode has worksheets, and the show notes contain the worksheets. And in the worksheets, it's like, okay, we just learned about Alzheimer's disease and how to do certain things to stave that off or recover from it. Okay, we learned negotiation tactics on how to negotiate a raise or save money on a car. Here are these 10 things that you can do to apply those skills so that you remember them and things like that. And that is actually quite important, because that's what makes a good podcaster for a smart audience is, am I coming away having learned something? So when you listen to Tim Ferriss, you learn how someone else thinks. When you listen to the Jordan Harbinger Show, you learn how someone else thinks, and you can apply what they know for yourself. And when you listen to Joe Rogan, you learn a lot about that person, but do you have it's a 3-hour long show. There may be 18 minutes in there where like that was really informative. But again, I don't know if you can particularly apply what that person knows. And I don't mean that in any sort of derogatory way. Like, I enjoy both of those shows. It's just that we all have different strengths. If you're looking for a funny show, I would choose Rogan over Tim Ferriss. And if you're looking for a big celebrity, I would choose Tim Ferriss over the Jordan Harbinger Show for the most part, right? That's why I think we probably have so much overlap, is because there's so many people that listen to Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan and the Jordan Harbinger Show, because we offer those different things, but they're all for, at least most of the episodes are for people that like to learn, that are intelligent, that are educating or self-educating, that want to be able to learn something that they can hopefully later on actually use.
That's such a great analogy. Like, I listen to the Joe Rogan Show when I'm doing laundry.
Yeah.
I mean? It's like, it's taking my mindless task and making me laugh. But, Tim Ferriss is a little different and yours is a little different. So that's actually a really great point. How do you think about podcasting now from when you started? In other words, is there anything that you've changed your mind about through the years? Good question.
Yes. There are certainly things that I've changed my mind about through the years. I'm trying to think about, you know what? Here's one. I wouldn't say brag, but I used to be kind of like, cocky's probably the right word.
A little more ego?
Yeah, but with respect to, for example, I remember my wife always brings this up. She says, Jordan reads the books and he's doing this and he's watching the TED Talks and he's watching the Google Talks and he's listening to their interview on another show and he's listening to NPR, and then he goes and he reads the old book that they wrote 8 years ago and da-da-da-da. But before, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I remember somebody sent me, they send you galleys, they send you review copies of the book. And I would just throw them in the recycle bin, or I'd donate them to the library, depending on whether the library wanted those types of books. And I'm like, why do people think I'm going to read their book before I interview them? That's so ridiculous. Like, I have time for that. I can just read the synopsis and then do the conversation. I don't need to read the whole book. And people were like, yeah, I don't get why anybody would read the whole book before the interview. And then I interviewed Robert Greene for my 7-year anniversary episode, which was 5 years ago now. And I remember going, all right, I don't want to screw this up. He's kind of a big deal. I really like what he's doing. I've read most of his book, but it was so long ago. Let me pick it up again, read it, highlight it, etc. So I did that. I read it. I highlighted it. I prepared. I created a great show outline. And at the end of the episode, he goes, this is one of the best interviews I've ever done. Why did this take so long? And I was like, I wanted to do it right, And he goes, man, this is good. I get interviewed by a lot of journalists. This is a really good interview. And then I was like, wait a minute. What if I read all of the books? And what if I did all of the necessary prep to really knock every episode of the show out of the park? And I did that. And then I remember now I'm like, how on earth are you going to do an interview with somebody if you didn't read their book? How the hell are you not just wasting their time and the time of your audience? Because I'm not here to give a synopsis of the book. They can get that on a PDF. They can listen to an audio synopsis on Audible. I'm here to have a conversation with the guest about the book, and I can't do that if I didn't read the book. And you're sure publicists give you those little sheets where it's like 4 questions that you can ask. That's for lazy AM or FM radio morning show talk show hosts. That's not for a deep dive into a topical subject matter. And those 4 questions, if you use those, guess what? Your interview sounds exactly like every other interview that person has done. So the Jordan Harbinger Show is like 45 minutes to an hour long. 4 questions are that's a 5-6 minute radio piece. So it's just not as interesting. So I learned that going back to outworking everyone in home economics class, the best thing you can do is be so well prepared that the guest is like, oh, this is a real conversation now. I'm not just going to be like, here's my 4 sound bites I had for radio this morning. I remember interviewing a guy a few days ago. He said he did 16 interviews that day. And I said, well, this is going to be different. And he goes, yeah, this one says it's an hour. Is that correct? And I said, yeah, I read the whole book. And he goes, oh, okay. And so we did it. And at the end, he goes, I thought I was going to be dead by this interview, but because I did 16, but this was by far the most informative, interesting, and exciting and science-filled interview that we did. And he goes, I'm glad that I ended with this one. Because of course he spent the whole morning from 5 a.m. to 11 a.m. going, oh yeah, here's the same 4 things that I just answered 87 different times. And that makes for a good show. And it makes for a unique show. And that's a show that people actually want to listen to. Because otherwise, you're just doing what everyone else is doing. You've become a commodity. What's the point?
Yeah, plus you get them off their game, and they're telling the same freaking story that you don't even know if it actually happened the way they're telling it because they've told it so many times that you're just not getting reality there. But was there a particular inflection point for you that accounted for the hockey stick growth in downloads that you had with podcasting? In other words, were you on somebody's show? Or did somebody write an article about you where you're like, right after this happened, I exploded?
No, that's the disappointing / I guess interesting part about podcasting. There was never like a big break. And I spent 11 years trying to figure out what that big break might be. And it was like, oh, I'm going on Tony Robbins. And it's, yep, you get a big boost. Oh, I'm going on this other giant I'm on Adam Carolla and you get a boost. But then you go on Adam Carolla again, and it's like, okay, the boost is sort of faded. A couple of people stuck with you. The rest of them didn't, and you build these little bricks one at a time. And so when I look at my growth graph, there isn't like explosive growth here, explosive growth there, explosive. And then, a curve. It goes for over the course of years, it just goes up very, very slowly. And it just continually trended upward, which is good because a lot of shows, they trend downward and then they trend upward again. We really only had even remote downward trends in like December and then early January. And then it's like, oh, back up again. And that's something that we'd seen just for years. And so that's what we see now is just upward growth, but it's not continual. There is no hockey stick. It's really a slow grade incline.
So crazy. A buddy of mine's an actor, and he was in, he did a lot of bit roles and stuff, but then he gets to Titanic, and he's the Italian kid at the beginning of the movie. His name's Danny Nucci, and he was with DiCaprio, and they were, he was the one that he was playing the cards with, and he won to get onto the boat. And he was like, this is it. This is my spot. It's gonna go crazy, and nothing.
Yeah.
Even freaking Titanic. So it's interesting. Okay. Are there any specific routines or habits that you have in place around podcasting that is keeping you functioning at a super high level the way you are?
I spend a lot of time reading. I treat it as part of the job. I don't go, yeah, I've got to shovel in a few pages of this book later so that I can wing the interview tomorrow. I really treat that as part of the show. The show prep is the most important part of what I do. And that was really highlighted. It's kind of funny because getting quote unquote fired from my old company was actually the best thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to re-examine all of my priorities. It forced me to re-examine all of my habits and all of the things in my life that were creating good things in my life and the things that were not. So it was like, oh, I got to manage the stress, get back in the gym. Now I work out every day. And then it was like, No, I have so much to do. I've got to get up early. Now I get up early and I get more work done before lunch than most people get done all day. But my wife was really a big advocate of, look, you need to create really good content. You cannot release crap. You can't have one bad episode in the next 6 months to a year, because all of these new people are going to be finding you. All of these old people are going to be like, does he still have the magic? And so I worked extra hard on bringing out good shows. And that level of commitment to bringing out good material has stuck with me and stuck with the team. So my producer will stay up late releasing something. My show notes guy will go the extra mile. Stuff doesn't roll in late. I don't do an interview if I don't think it's going to be a good fit. If something records and it isn't up to snuff, we don't release it. There's all kinds of stuff like that maybe on the old show, we'd be like, look, we need to throw something in on Tuesday. It wasn't the greatest. It's episode 702. We'll survive. Now it's like, we can't air this. It's not phenomenal. Throw it away.
Yeah, the quality is much, much higher. How do you find rapport with guests that, you're really good at rapport. You're extraordinarily articulate. You just got that thing. Like, you just have the ability to communicate better than almost anybody I know. How do you find rapport with guests that you're not clicking with? And does that ever happen to you?
It does, yeah. It does happen a lot, especially if you're doing an interview that's remote and they're on Skype or Zencaster or whatever, and you don't know them well and they're a different generation. And you can really get some people that, especially, and look, sorry, scientists, but a lot of scientists are like this, because I think a lot of people who work in academic environments that are surrounded by a bunch of PhD candidates kissing their butt all the time, and also aren't necessarily maybe the most socially calibrated folks, they write a book and they're kind of like, all right, let's get to this. Let's get this over with, because they don't respect podcasts. They have to sell their book. They resent the fact that they actually have to market their work because they're coming from academia. They think it's not worth their time. And so there's a lot of people like that where it's kind of like, no matter what, they just don't want to be there. And the way that I've found works really well is I'll say something like, look, I've read the whole book and I also saw this and this and this. And then demonstrating an understanding of what they appreciate has worked really well. So for a scientist, for example, being like, I read the book and, I really like this and I really like that. And here's some questions I had about this. And they can tell by the questions that I actually cared enough to go into their work. And that generates a little rapport. The problem is it takes 20 minutes, right, of showtime to do it. That's another reason the show's an hour. There are other times where people come in and they just don't care and they don't have any respect for the platform. I'll name drop this person. I was interviewing Pauly Shore and he just didn't care. He could not have cared less. And I didn't air the show. And I remember his manager or some publicist, I think, was pretty annoyed about that. And I sent them the audio file and I said, you tell me that this is worth airing. Because in the middle of the interview, about 15 minutes in of an hour-long interview, he goes, hey, how much longer is this crap? I got some shit I got to do in the other room.
Come on.
And I went, well, we can let you go right now, Pauly. And he was like, okay, cool, man. Bye. I mean, he just didn't care.
He was probably high.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I was just thinking like, if you need to go take another hit, I'll wait, right?
Holy shit, that's so funny. Are there any particular podcasters that have impacted you? Not podcasts that you like. Is there anybody that you're like, you know what? This guy has got it going on in even a unique and different way. I mean, like we're looking at, like Malcolm Gladwell has his new thing now. There's a new podcast where they're talking about like inanimate objects, which is a very creative one. Everything is Alive, I think it's called. So there's a lot of new things out there. But is there anything for you that you're like, this is refreshing? This is really good.
I mean, some of the stuff I like is just objectively kind of stupid. But so I'll go into
like
that.
What? Give me the stupid one.
So there's one called Dexter Guff is Smarter Than You. And what it is a show that is a parody of self-help and those, these inspirational guys where they'll have some like 2-bit reality actor as the guest on the show. And the person, they're like, how do you, stay positive when you're in Hollywood and you're facing all this rejection. And the person's like, I just do yoga and I just like make sure I wake up every day with a smile on my face and be like, thank God I'm alive. And they're like, wow, it's so inspiring. There are real shows like that, right? But this Dexter Guff guy, the writers are these comedy writers from Canada, Chris Kelly and Kelly, and they just really nailed it where they'll have the guy, and it's explaining jokes is never funny, so I'll leave it at this. But they have the host going into like, oh, hey, Shelly, how you doing? Oh, I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show. Oh, where are you right now? Dubai? Oh, tell me you got a south-facing room at the Shangri-La. Oh, isn't that the best? And they're just like riffing on, oh, I flew here first class. It's just so nails the self-help niche and podcasting, inspiration, thought leader, influencer bullshit. And I just think it's really, really funny because it's kind of like everyone's in on that joke except for the people who are creating those shows.
Right. Okay, perfect. You've actually come out from, sort of behind the podcasting table and have done a lot of in-person stuff too. I mean, I remember one night I was sitting there with Kim and we were watching Larry King and, we see your pretty face on the TV and we're like, whoa, look at him, and then there's Adam Carolla. Do you prefer doing the in-person stuff or do you like, being at home behind the mic doing the podcast?
I like doing the in-person stuff. I think it's really interesting to see people's nonverbal stuff, going back to kind of what we were talking about before. That stuff is interesting for me. And you kind of don't have that, right? You don't really have that on Skype. And you also don't have it even if you're in person and you're not, let's see, this is kind of, there's something here that I'm missing. The reason that it's better in person is not only because you have nonverbal communication and you can kind of see what's going on, but also there's a social contract where I flew out to Kentucky or New York to interview this person, so they can't cut it short. They can't be distracted. They can't look at their phone. Their assistant can come in and I can say, can I get 15 more minutes? I mean, I traveled really far and I really am enjoying this. They can't, I squeeze them a little, right? And I think there's something there where they just respect the process a little bit more. And you also end up with a connection where the guide that guides us socially, the unspoken rules of society are in full force. So if I'm sitting in front of Larry King, it's different than he sitting there on his phone in a basement going, who am I talking to right now? To his assistant, right? It's better if I'm sitting in front of him because we're on equal footing. And I think that just makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and there's an energy between two people that just doesn't exist. I don't know how to put it in any other words, but when you're just hanging with somebody, there's also the nonverbals. But I think there's just, I don't know, there's just an energy when sitting there with somebody. So to that point, do you see yourself moving into either, moving to LA or New York and having people fly in to meet with you and setting up, like a Rich Roll, Lewis Howes sort of environment?
No, I don't think I'll do that. As much as I'd like to do the shows in person, doing them in those cities is not really appealing to me. And I do see some of those shows where everybody comes into the studio, but I also see that that's kind of more for them to become an Instagram influencer or a YouTuber than it is to get really good rapport with the guest. And I don't want to mention anybody's name, of course, but there are a lot of low quality shows that are done in person. And so I think I can bring the in-person quality to most of what I do. And just having the numbers that I do, I can kind of drag everybody up to San Francisco anyway. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, you're at the top of your game, so you get to call it, but you earned it. I mean, you've done so many years of this. All right, so let's move into the second half of the show, which is much quicker. It's the play hard round of the show. And most entrepreneurs are super driven and they just don't take the time to play. Now, play hard does not have to be champagne spraying in Saint-Tropez, which I've been accused of a lot, although it could be. It could be something as simple as making the time to read the book that you've always wanted to read. But the point is that it's something that's non-work related. So the first question is, if you could spend 1 month anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
My wife and I we love these escape rooms. And so we're probably going to go to Eastern Europe where these things are popular and just play as many as we can. And so that's probably why, because we love those things. Not because there's great geography or great food. It's really just these escape rooms. It's like a thing that they've got there in force.
So crazy. I was in the elevator in my building yesterday and there's a new one here in Atlanta that everybody's talking about. But I'm so crazy claustrophobic that she was describing it to me. I was like, get the fuck, like I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Yeah, it depends on the room. Yeah.
What's the thing that's rocking your world now that has nothing to do with work?
Good question. Nothing to do with work?
Yep.
I mean, I've been studying Chinese for a long time and I'm starting to get good enough at it where I can understand pretty much everything that's being said to me. So that's kind of cool. And I've been studying a lot of vocab to really ramp it up. Yeah. Yeah, I got kind of a new energy with it.
How much time do you take off to recharge and refocus per week or per year, or how do you hit the reset button?
Yeah, that's something that I wouldn't say I necessarily struggle with it. I just don't prioritize it. So I don't actually spend much / any time off. I do take time off on trips occasionally where I'll wrap in a couple of days extra. And for example, I'm going to Australia in October. And I'm going to be speaking at a conference. It's 3 days long. Then there's like a day-long speaker retreat. And then after that, I think we're staying for another week and change to hang out with friends and enjoy Australia a little bit. So we tack those things on. But I don't do that whole like, I'm taking 2 months and going to Greece. That sounds nice in theory, but it doesn't really work with what I'm doing. And I think I would get bored really fast.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Other than time, what's the biggest block, challenge, or struggle with adding more play into your life?
I'm a workaholic, so I don't go, I just don't have time. I'm just kind of like, I don't want to do that. I'd rather, if I have a big block of free time, I don't go, I'm going to go down to the beach and lay around. I go, I'm going to read. I'm going to read this book for the show. Okay.
If you had all the time and the money to pursue any hobby or recreational activity, what would it be and why? So in other words, what's the one thing that you've always wanted to learn? I know you mentioned Chinese, but you just haven't gotten around to. Is there anything else in that area, like surfing, playing guitar? Is there anything that's been like, I just really would love to do that?
Yeah, this is weird and probably has to do with work, but so you can disqualify it if you want. But I live so close to Stanford that I thought, what if I just go to journalism school and learn how to do all these interviews and stuff like that from an actual course, from people who've actually done this as a career instead of just figuring it out on my own, which I've been doing for the last decade and change.
I would argue you don't need it, but I totally get why you want to do it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about auditing some classes versus enrolling and then finding out after one expensive semester that I don't need it,
For sure. I think you could actually teach the freaking class, to be honest with you. A lot of people talk about the morning routine, right? That's like the hot button question, but I'm kind of interested in your evening routine. Do you have any like wind down routine that's interesting? Glass of wine with the wife, music, or nothing really to speak of?
It depends, really. One thing I do for sure is I make sure that I take probiotics and vitamins and things like that, because I feel like during the day I'm go. Half the time my breakfast or lunch is just like a coffee because I'm just working and I don't feel hungry or something like that. And so I need to make sure that I'm getting nutrition, eating right. But I put on blue blockers because I do like to watch Vice News or play video games with my wife or something like that. But I don't want to have blue light screwing me up. So I put on blue blockers. We changed the lighting in the house to be like red, kind of. A red and purple, like very dark and dim and not a lot of blue light in the mix. And so we use those LED light bulbs, like the Philips Hue, along with blue blockers, and we just kind of sit around with the cat or friends and hang out. But no, I don't really do like wine. I don't really do anything like that. But I do make sure that I'm taking care of my body a little bit. And I go to bed pretty early.
What time you go to bed?
Like 10.
Me too.
It's not super early, but I think for a lot of people, they're like, what?
No, it's early-ish. It's early-ish.
Yeah.
And the older you get, the earlier it gets. Okay, let's wrap up with some rapid fire questions. Answer as quickly or as slowly as you'd like. It's basically a first thing that comes to mind round. What would your friends say is one of your superpowers?
geez. Languages, probably.
What's one of the things you're afraid of right now?
Drowning in a cave underwater. It's not rational. Does it have to be a rational thing?
Anything you want. What keeps you up at night?
Nothing. I sleep like a rock.
What do people never ask you but you wish they did?
Oh, that's great. How do I get more work done? People are always asking me for shortcuts, but they're never asking me how they can actually do more of what matters.
What's the one thing you want to get better at?
I want to get better at interviewing, even if until I'm the best that there is.
What audiobook or regular book have you re-listened to the most times?
Probably Extreme Ownership with Jocko Willink, because it really is something where you can't pass on the responsibility. So it's a good sort of concept to have. Plus, it's got cool like combat stories in it and stuff, so it goes pretty quick.
Yeah, shit blowing up always gets guys going.
Exactly.
What's the one thing that you own and probably should throw out but never will?
Oh man, that's also really good. Should throw out but never will. My wife probably has a huge list of things I should throw out but never will. Probably this vintage RE20 microphone that I use. I mean, I could easily replace this, but I don't want to.
If you could give a TED Talk on nothing that you're known for, nothing that you speak about, and it could be really on anything that you like or anything you have a passion for or anything else at all, what would it be?
These are really good questions. I think I would give a talk, nothing that I'm known for, nothing that I speak about. I would probably give a talk on how to travel to dangerous places because I've done a lot of that. And there aren't any books about it.
Yeah. Okay, last question. We're going to change it up. What one question do you want to ask me?
Why do you still podcast after like 10 years?
Because like you, I obsess over microphones. I obsess over the questions. I obsess over learning what I did right, learning what I did wrong, wanting to do the best. I study guys like you and Larry King and see what makes it work. I'm insatiably curious. And it is a beautiful way for me to step into a world that I'm not going to get you on the phone. You got your life going, but I got you for an hour to sit here and ask you anything I want, which weaves into the fabric of my life. And it changes who I am as a person because of all this information that I have.
Well, I'm happy to do it, man. And I appreciate the opportunity.
Sure. Do you have any final words, suggestions, or an ask for the people that are listening?
Sure. If you're listening to a podcast, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show, and every episode has worksheets, and I always strive to teach people what I know. And I also have a course on building relationships networking, which is what saved my bacon and allowed me to really restart really quick. It's the best thing you can do in business or your personal life is have a strong network, and the course is free. And that's at advancedhumandynamics.com/level1, advancedhumandynamics.com/level1. But yeah, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show and let me know what you think. I hope to see some new show fans as a result.
All right. Thanks for listening. If you love this episode and you know someone that needs some help in either stepping up their work hard game or their play hard game, it would mean the world to me if you shared this podcast with them to help me get this movement out there. So if you like what you heard, head on over to iTunes, take 30 seconds and leave me a 5-star review, and I will be forever grateful. So until the next episode, excuses are over. It's time to live.